introduce our speaker for today, Bill Godfrey. Bill retired as Fire Chief of the Deltona, Florida Fire Department after 25 years of service. He told me the other day it was a very brief retirement. He became CEO of C3 Pathways, who's a certified partner of the Department of Homeland Security, focusing on developing and delivering specialized training for police, fire, and emergency medical services personnel across the United States. Bill's also very technical. He's principal technology architect at C3 Pathways, and he will talk to us today about his Agora integration experience, which focused on enabling audio and content sharing for virtual hands-on training exercises for police, firefighters, and emergency medical services. Over to you, Bill.
All right, Patrick, thank you very much for that gracious introduction. Let me get the slide deck pulled up here. All right, we're good to go. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. And Patrick, thank you for that introduction. It's been real fun today watching some of the presentations, and I hope everyone has enjoyed them with me. What I want to do real quick is just get you oriented to what C3 Pathways does as a Homeland Security training provider. We deal with first responders, and we train them to deal with the worst of the worst. So this is where we found ourselves shortly into COVID, when everybody became very apparent that this was not going to be over quickly. DHS made the call to shut down face-to-face training. All of the training that we do to prepare first responders for these horrific events is hands-on and face-to-face. And so the question came up, can you do hands-on training remotely, and how would we do that? And so we looked at what would it take. And so this was kind of our shopping list of what we thought it would take if we were going to do hands-on training remotely. They needed to be instructor-led, real-time. It needed to be a familiar environment to responders. We needed natural conversation. Couldn't have distraction of, you got to click this button, do this thing. That wasn't going to work. A public address system that the students and instructors could both use. More than just PowerPoint, we needed to project pretty much any software, from mapping to other public safety products and some classified stuff that we use in public safety. We needed a multi-channel push-to-talk radio system. Hands-on interactivity was a big one, and then the ability to do full-scale exercises and a scenario debrief. And so we translated that into a set of requirements. And as we went through this, we said, okay, real-time instructor-led. We need a real-time, ultra-low latency. I'll talk about that in a second. A public safety training center was our venue that we decided. We were going to do this in a 3D first-person point-of-view experience, building within Unity, which we had experience in. And we are going to build this out in a photorealistic training center environment that would be familiar to responders, something that they felt like they'd been in before. We needed 3D positional audio to do the natural conversation, and we needed photorealistic avatars. Unfortunately, in our demographic, for better or worse, you put them into cartoon avatars and the whole thing turns into a joke and you just lose them for professional training. So it needed to have that photorealism. We used 2D channels for the instructors and the participants on the public address system. Same thing on the radios. For the broadcasting of PowerPoint and the others, we just decided to do screen capture. We needed to do multiplayer synchronization with less than 150 millisecond round trip latency. We were lucky here because we have other simulation systems that we have developed and use in our training. So we already know how to do this, and we were able to leverage a lot of that. And then lastly, for the full-scale exercise scenarios, we needed maps, poker chips, whiteboards, vests, and some other tools to be able to do that and make that work. And oh, by the way, DHS gave us 90 days to do it. They said, if you're going to try and you're going to make it work, you need to be able to field it in 90 days. So we literally went from ideas on a napkin at lunchtime to our first class in 90 days. So I'm going to break out of the PowerPoint here real quick and just show you the quick video on the campus. So this is a quick 3-minute video that'll show you scenes from an actual class that we did. Welcome to the virtual National Center for Integrated Emergency Response. When you log into the campus, you'll load into our grand lobby. And on the morning of your class, your instructors will be waiting to greet you, just as Harry and Brandon are here this morning.
Now, when we look at some hints in the intelligence unit, The first thing that we have to really assume, and I think that this is standard for most positions in the active shooter incident management, is that there's going to be overload. You're going to have information that's coming in, and the best way to do that is utilize the contact teams
for the students when they get to the reunification site. And oftentimes, we're going to have an off-site reunification location in a school violent event because the school that just was impacted by this incident is now a crime scene. So our first scenario this morning is going to be at the Montgomery County Courthouse. If we get our dispatchers up to room 12.
All units in Squad A, we received a panic alarm at 58 Broadway.
108 to dispatch.
Go ahead, 108.
Be 10-9 on location. Any update?
1, engine 2 on scene, paging.
So Todd, if you've been assigned triage, you can just head over to that room right there.
For contact 2, I'm thinking about having our contact team going to the north side of room 35. Contact 1 and contact 2 are together. We're going to be moving towards the north side of room 35 to engage.
All right, so you got...
All units be advised, elapsed time 10 minutes, 10 minutes for exercise.
Go ahead.
All units, room 1 is secured for CCP. 3 reds, 1 green.
HRTF, if you want to have your team leader click on your chips and move them over. So the belt, room 1, the courthouse is over here.
Triage from rescue task number 2.
Division is en route, gang units en route, and for him just to let you know when he's ready to turn the scene over to them. And we're going to give a little PIO briefing here.
I'm Mike Potia. I'm the Public Information Officer for this incident.
Do you believe there may be a gang problem in our community?
That is not part of this investigation. We're concentrating on this incident that happened today. Next question.
Social media is telling us that there was an officer shot and killed. Can you confirm that?
There were no officers shot and killed. Next question.
Contact teams did a great job.
We linked back up with contact 1, moved everybody into that area.
So we will start off with tactical.
We had contact team 1 arrive at building 5 in the cafeteria. They reported 3 red, 2 green.
It was nice having transportation right next to me so we could just verbally talk. As far as transport goes, things went very smooth because
had all patients transported at the 23-minute mark.
It was my first role in the staging position here. And it's definitely a lot of information and a lot to digest.
Okay, any questions about either of the scenarios or the morning block before we... All right, so what you may have noticed, that was actually from one of our smaller classes, but what you may have noticed is that the discussions didn't have anything to do with the technology or the whiz-bang of any of it. It all had to do with the training that we were after, and that was what we were trying to accomplish. So let's get into the guts of this thing. So our Preagora, our initial strategy was to roll out a commercial live streaming service for the broadcast and then use a commercial gaming chat solution. So what we found out is that live isn't live. Even the low latency ones run a 10 to 20 second latency, and we couldn't do that. We needed something that was going to be 1 to 2 seconds latency. That was what led us to Agora in the first place. So we implemented Agora for doing the broadcast of the PowerPoint presentations, the maps, all that kind of stuff, and then used a commercial gaming chat solution. And that was our version 1.0 that we went live with. That failed and was just problematic from the day we fielded it until the day we made the decision to rip it out and replace it with Agora. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but on the commercial gaming chat solutions, they do the audio mixing actually on the server. So each individual user sends their audio stream to the server, and then the server does the calculations because you also have to set up your 3D positions. And then it calculates the gain and the pan on each of the individuals and sends the mix stream back. It requires a high volume of position updates. They had no line of sight method. So, if somebody was on the other side of the wall, they would come through at full volume. So we had to roll our own on that. It was a challenge, to say the least. They use an area of interest list management system. If you've ever worked with MMOs, you know what an AOI is. But if you imagine a 10-meter radius around participants, that's the people that have interest. Well, theirs had a lot of latency, was very buggy. You literally could have somebody a meter away from you that wouldn't be in your area of interest list for no particular reason, or they'd be there and then they'd go away and come back 30 seconds later. The thing was unstable. If you had more than 16 people in your area of interest, it became unstable, and it would actually crash when you got to 30 people in your area of interest. The worst part was that for reasons that were never explained to us, we would send the 3D positions to the server and it would just fail and it would fall back to 2D audio. So a guy way on the other side of the room that I should barely be able to hear would come blasting through at full volume, and it never corrected itself. So finally, after several months of fighting with this, I mean, literally months of spending, days and night working on this, we said, enough. Agora had been rock solid for us on the broadcast, and we said that's it. We ripped out the commercial gaming chat solution, replaced it with Agora, and never looked back. We spent 2 weeks doing the integration and then put it back in the classroom. So there were some obstacles. I don't want to make it sound like it was it went pretty well. And here's the funny thing is, even though we had bugs and we had problems with that very first version of Agora that we fielded, it was night and day better than what we had before. It was just unbelievable. But there were some obstacles along the way. Understanding the nuances of the API and trying to learn that was a bit challenging. There was some circular explanations that, said see each other. And then the use of acronyms didn't really help. I think one of my favorite explanations of that, we went looking at this firewall chart that they have in their API because we needed to know which ports we were running on. And we looked at these acronyms and went, well, what are we using? And that's a little embarrassing to admit because we were actually live in publication, but we had moved so quickly that we didn't know them, and we know them all now. We struggled until we got access to the engineering team, and I want to give a big shout out to Brad Mortensen over at Agora on the sales side. He called up one day and said, Bill, I'm Brad from the sales team. See, you guys are using this. Just wanted to see how it's going and if you need anything. And I said, well, nice to meet you. And yeah, absolutely. We need to get on the phone or on a video call with some engineers because we have questions. We need a dialogue back and forth. Brad made that happen in very short order, and that was a turning point for us. Within days, we had questions answered. They corrected a number of misunderstandings. For example, we assumed that they were mixing the audio down at the server level, like the commercial gaming chat solutions. They're not. They're sending the audio and it's mixing down to the client. I'll talk more about that in a minute. They suggested some options to overcome some problems we were having. We do have some remaining challenges on firewalls with a lack of transparency. I'll talk more about that. And then raw access into the Unity objects as well. There were a couple of surprises along the way. One of the funniest was this scenario with the gaming profile. So it actually says in the API, this is a profile, uses a codec with a lower bit rate, consumes less power, and applies to the gaming scenario where all players can talk freely. We're like, great, that's exactly what we want. Note, Agora does not recommend using this setting. Okay. Well, we had just gotten burned pretty badly using another chat. So we said, well, they say don't use it. We're not going to use it. So we came up with a different solution. As I mentioned, the audio mixing occurs on the client. But one of the things that came as a surprise to us is that even within a single channel, you can have 16 speakers in that channel, but only the 3 loudest are delivered to the client. That's default and built into the API. So if you have all 16 people speaking, the delivery is only going to occur for the 3 loudest, and there's no way to guarantee which 3 those are going to be, if those are the closest 3 or anything else. And so that was an issue that we kind of had to engineer around. They do have a private API that'll allow you to increase that. We didn't go down that road. We just dealt with it through an architecture issue. We did implement a 16-person channel limit. The documentation says 17. We ran into a couple of problems at 17 that magically went away at 16, so we just capped it at 16 channel limit for broadcasters in one channel. There were a couple of things that weren't really clear to us. The implications of some of the client roles were a little fuzzy in the early days. And the audio profiles and audio scenarios, they have descriptive names, but the API didn't actually tell us what they did differently at a technical level and how the behavior differed. And so we were kind of playing a little hit and miss trial and error on that. We also found that some of the scenarios wouldn't work when we were trying to set the volume and things like that. So we found one that worked, and then we just ran with that. When we did this work, the Agora channel API was brand new. I think it had only been released about a month before we started using it. So there was some of the functionality that was in our RTC engine that was missing from the Agora channel. Some of the documentation is clear. I think most of that has been cleaned up now, and they've been adding functionality with every SDK release since we did this. No defined port usage structure. This was a bit of a shock to me. So as a government provider of government training, our clients are all government. I have to be able to tell the network administrator what ports, and in some cases, what ports and IP addresses that we're going to be using for them to authorize our software to run on their network. And when we got to talking with senior engineering, the answer we got back on the regular SDK is it'll use any available port. I go, well, no, I mean, I need the range. And no, it'll use any available port. I said, good God, there's over 52,000 ports. It can use any one. Well, yeah, that's kind of a challenge for us. So we ended up moving over to the cloud proxy solution, so we can actually say with some deterministic certainty to the government the government network administrators, this is what we're using, this is what we're not using, and then we also had a couple of confusions on the billing, but those weren't huge issues. So let's talk about the architecture. So big screen at the front of the room, super simple. It's a single channel. All users subscribe. We were using the external browser with a camera capture. That was to get our frame rate up. We were using OBS. We have since migrated to the new web interface. So the original web capture, our browser capture of a screen, had a max frame rate of about 5 frames per second, which was not good enough for the video. The new one that they've just released it allows us to go up to 30 frames. It's working fantastic, and so we're able to broadcast those. Push-to-talk radio, also super simple. Each channel, channels 1 through 6, is one Agora channel. Whichever one you select, you subscribe in the audience role. When you right-click your mouse, that changes your role to broadcast, and you actually transmit on the radio. We gave the users the ability to set the volume of the radio up or down the way they do on their public safety radios now. And then interestingly, we ended up having to add a radio effect to channels 1 through 6. So channel 7 is our public address. But one of the feedback we got early on was, hey, this audio is so good, I can't tell when it's the radio and when it's somebody talking to me. And so we actually added a radio effect on the audio, so it sounds like a radio as opposed to somebody standing right next to you. So let's talk about the spatial audio calculation. So you'll see in this picture, we've got red shirt guy in the middle of the room surrounded by some green shirt guys. So red shirt guy is user 132, and he establishes his own channel, which we've just magically named user underscore 132. He's the broadcaster on that channel, and then the green shirt guys subscribe to user 132. So if they're in proximity and line of sight, they subscribe to users 132. And of course, user 132 is cross-subscribing back to the other ones. Now let's take a close-up look of what that means on the ground. So we're doing 2 calculations. One is we're saying, okay, who's in proximity? It's a simple radius check. And then we run a secondary line of sight so that if there's a wall or other obstruction, we cut that out. And that's how we're kind of controlling this. Then we built a fall-off curve. We built our own curve. Some of the literature and the science says what these curves are supposed to be. When we tried that, it didn't feel right and sound right, so we tuned it up to where it felt right to us, similar to a normal room. So one of the other interesting things is you would think that the red shirt guy would set his gain and pan for the people that are subscribed to him, but that ended up being problematic on a couple of levels. We actually ran into a few bugs. So instead, the green shirts set their gain and pan for Mr. Red Shirt Guy. So because we're using our own multiplayer synchronization system in Unity, the green shirts know where red shirt is, and so they can quickly do the math on what that distance is and adjust that calculation to go. So challenges. We optimized for rapid deployment, not for billing. We took it in the teeth on that one, and that's okay. From Agora's perspective, our bills are still really small compared to some of these people I were listening to that, had tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of users. But as our bookkeeper says, we created an n-squared billing problem. So you got 200 users cross-subscribed to 200 users. Do the math. That's a lot of channels to be billed for by the minute. So we are going to work through that. That's part of our roadmap in the future. We did make an arbitrary decision to limit the positional subscribing to the closest 16 users. That was just an arbitrary number we made a decision on based on bandwidth considerations for the client, because each one of those users has to come back to the client machine. What we found in practice was kind of interesting. So nobody really likes close talkers in real life. It turns out they don't really like them in VR either. If you get too close, people back away. So what we actually saw in practice is that we rarely saw more than 10 people in your area of interest. Bandwidth management is a concern. It's something to watch out for because you're hauling back, in our case, if we would be hauling back 16 voice signals plus the video signal from the broadcast plus the signals from the radio and potentially instructor as well. Port usage continues to be a concern of mine. This is something I'm continuing to have dialogue about with Agora. I realize that we're an exception in their use case, being a provider of government training. Our cybersecurity concerns are up there a little bit, and it doesn't make sense to me that the baseline SDK can just grab onto any of 52,000 plus ports. And they're, Agora, to their credit, they're engaging that conversation, talking about some options, and they're working with us to make that right. We have a solution now. So we've been able to move forward on that, and I really appreciate their engagement on that front. The last thing is I think we can improve our automated error recovery. We've done pretty well. But over the course of an 8-hour day, so these are 8-hour, these are classes that run 2 days for 8 hours each day. Our typical class size, we thought it was going to be about 200. It ended up being about 60. And over the course of the 8 hours, we'll have 2, sometimes 3 users who get into an unrecoverable audio state where they have to quit the app and then log back in. And we think we could do that a little bit better. Roadmap for future improvements. Raw audio access back into Unity is a big one. So in the Windows environment, Agora's SDK is using the DLL to play the audio back through essentially the Windows operating system, the Windows hardware. And I get that, and it works really well, but Unity has spatialization built into it. It's got Dolby 7.1 surround. It's got head-related transfer functions so that basically within Unity, you can make that sound like it's coming from above you and behind you to the right, or down and below you to the left. So that capability is built into Unity. But when we tried to grab the raw audio from Agora and pipe that back into the Unity audio source, we ran into some quality issues, mainly because we don't know what we're doing. We're not the Agora engineers. And then we also ran into some performance problems. So I think that's one that the Agora engineers are really going to have to solve if they choose to take on that mission, which I hope they do, because when you talk about 3D positional audio, wow, to be able to bring that audio back into Unity as an audio source and then pump it through that spatialization system is pretty phenomenal. I mentioned earlier, we've already switched to the new web SDK. Wow, shout out to that team. That new web SDK is fantastic. We've had zero trouble with it at all. We are going to do some optimization for billing. One of the things on our list is Vox voice activated. As a career public safety guy, I've never seen a voice activated system work worth a crap. So I don't have a lot of hope for ours, but we're going to go down that road anyways. We're also looking at using a trunk system. So within each channel, within each Agora channel, we've got 16 different streams we can use. And by using a trunk system, we can kind of optimize for that. We're also looking at, instead of a user-based positional subscription on the spatial audio, going to a zone-based system. We have a use case in the future here with what we do with Homeland Security that we need to scale up to about 10,000 users. We don't really know how we're going to load test that. So that's something we're working through. Sound interface. We basically kicked that can down the road because we were in such a hurry. We tell our users, hey, you got to drop back to your OS and make your audio, your mic and speaker, the default audio. We're not going to handle that in our app. I think we can do better on that. And then lastly, for our network administrators, I want to be able to give them a automated test and connect app so that ahead of the class, they can run that app on their network that says you're good to go, or you've got this port blocked, you've got these IP addresses blocked, and kind of gives them some deterministic information on what's going on. And so with that, I think we're about at the right time. Patrick, I'm going to come back to you as I wrap this up. I do want to say thank you to Agora, just from the bottom of my heart. The Agora solution enabled us to get back up and running and successfully train public safety in the United States again. And it was a really, really big deal. It is the only solution that has the ultra low latency and, quite frankly, would stand up to public safety personnel. You can see in the bottom of my slide here, I've got this little note in parentheses, but Public safety people are tough on stuff. We have a running joke. You can put a cop and a firefighter in a room with 3 steel balls, come back in 10 minutes. One of the steel balls will be broken, one will be missing, and nobody knows anything about it. They are a tough group. With that, Patrick, let me go back to you, and let's see what we've got, if anything, for questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Bill. There were just 2 questions in the chat, and I think one of them you touched on a bit during the session, but I'll read it out for further comment. It says, I may have missed this, but why not use Agora's 3D spatial audio? If you're using Unity, there's a whole integration guide on how to use Pun2 and Agora 3D spatial audio in Unity.
That's a really good question, and it's not one I know that I can give you a real detailed answer to. We had a gun to our head to get this done in very short order. Basically, the commercial solution we had been using prior was not working well, and we were at a point where we were going to fail. So we needed to get it up and running quickly, and it was before we had access to the engineers. It was very difficult to tell that spatial audio stuff that they were talking about using. We looked at that. It wasn't clear whether that was tied into the gaming SDK that Agora was recommending we didn't use. And so basically not knowing whether we could be successful with that, we went down this other road because it was a sure bet. We felt like we could leverage Agora's platform and the ultra low latency for the video and the audio safer and become successful within the time frame that we had. But I think as we're moving now and talking with Agora about how to move forward, I think everything's on the table.
Great, thanks, Bill. And the one other question, it's a congratulatory, a very interesting, and congrats on a great use case. Just to clarify for myself, you have built your own attenuation and occlusion engine for managing what you describe as the line of sight conversations. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. But it's not terribly complicated. Within Unity, of course, we're working within the Unity environment. So if you know anything about Unity, we're basically using a raycast to do a line of sight. We've, set up the layers the way we need them. And so we punch through to see whether or not we can hit the person without hitting a wall or other solid surface. You may have noticed the little green speckle things. Those are audio breaks. So that reacts to the line of sight to cut that down. And if they're not on the line of sight, so we used to just attenuate them down to like make it really softer so that you could still hear them, but they were soft. And the feedback we got from the users is no, it just doesn't, it's noise and it doesn't make sense. So now if we don't complete the line of sight, even though that person's in range, we basically take them out of the subscription so that their noise does not come through on the audio.
Great.
Did I answer all of that? Was there an attenuation question part of that, Patrick?
Yes. Did you build your own attenuation as well as the occlusion engine?
Yes. So we created, I meant that when I was talking about the curve and the roll off, we did kind of create our own curve and roll off. It's not terribly complicated math, but we were guided by, there's some science and research out there that talks about, sound levels, pressure levels, decibel levels of normal conversation, blah, 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 blah. That's what we implemented when we started, was basically replicating those curves. But in practical usage, it didn't feel right. It felt too loud or too low, or it didn't fit the environment we were working in. In some cases, some of the rooms, as you've noticed, were fairly small. And some of that recommended research, if you will, on that audio level left the volumes for conversation up too high, and you almost couldn't get far enough away from the person to have their audio go down. So in order for it to work from a naturalistic effect, we attenuated that a little bit further. We also do some other things that are less architecturally driven from a technical side, and more so this is how we use it in training. And so we know we can get away with this solution because this is how it works in training. Anything else?
Great. We have about a couple minutes. Anyone else have any questions? Please go ahead and type those up in the chat. Okay. I think we've got just a little bit of time left. But everyone, thank you very much for attending the session. Bill, thank you. A great presentation. Really love the description and the walkthrough of everything in the great detail. And look forward to continuing to work with you and build great things.
Absolutely. I'm very excited. And I really do mean it from the bottom of my heart. Thank you to Agora, not only for what you've done, but just for the support that you all have provided us. I know we're a really oddball use case, but it was really needed. And I think this is going to give us legs for years to come as a new way to train public safety and first responders across the country. We've got some great growth opportunities, training seminars, conferences that we do with public safety that really lets us play this out, as well as some other stuff. And, I would like to offer, I've put my contact information up there on the screen. If you want to get in touch with me later to ask some other questions or talk in more detail, I'm happy to discuss it. We're a small team. And we're, all hands on deck. So I'm happy to talk about the trials and tribulations of what we did. And we don't really have a lot of secrets.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Bill.
My pleasure. Thank you.